Historian who denied Holocaust loses his libel action. New development tonight in the Stephen Lawrence murder inquiry. Cricket world rocked as South African captain admits cheating. And controversy as RUC prepare to receive highest honour from the Queen.
From ITN, the ITV Nightly News with Dermot Murnahan.
Good evening. David Irving, the right-wing historian branded a Holocaust denier, said tonight he was crushed but not destroyed after his high-profile libel action failed, leaving him facing a £2 million bill for costs. He'd sued Penguin Books and the author Deborah Lipstadt over a book about his views on Nazi Germany and the Holocaust. And he didn't just lose the High Court case, he was also heavily criticised by the judge. Mr. Justice Gray said Irving was an active Holocaust denier, anti-Semitic and racist, and ruled that he portrayed Hitler in an unwarrantedly favourable light. Kevin Dunn has the story.
Tonight, David Irving is facing financial and professional ruin, though he insists his reputation as a historian has not been destroyed.
As you can see, I'm anything but destroyed. I'm crushed, but not destroyed. My opponents have tried to destroy my reputation as a historian, but they have not succeeded in exterminating me. And they still haven't succeeded in exterminating me.
Nazi scum!
He arrived at the High Court to be bombarded with taunts and eggs, one of which hit him on the back of his head. But of more lasting hurt was the devastating judgment against him. Irving had sued American professor Deborah Lipstadt and her publishers for branding him a denier of the Holocaust. It was a desperate legal gamble, which he lost. When the Russians liberated Auschwitz, the most notorious of Nazi death camps, they found ample evidence of mass killings, including tons of human hair and belongings taken from the victims. But Irving maintained there were no gas chambers at Auschwitz, and that no more than 300,000 people died here, and they mainly from disease. These are the ruins of crematorium number 2, which David Irving maintained in court was not a gas chamber. If gas was used here, he claimed, it was not to kill, but to fumigate the corpses of those who had already died by other means. The libel trial was shown film of Irving addressing meetings of neo-Nazis, in which he described Auschwitz as a macabre Disney World built for tourists. The judge, Mr. Justice Gray, said views like that showed Irving was anti-Semitic and racist. Professor Lipstadt said she had been thoroughly vindicated.
It was a struggle for truth and for memory, and a fight against those who sowed the seeds of racism and anti-Semitism.
The judgment leaves Irving's credibility as a historian in tatters, but Professor Lipstadt's victory also confirms the very truth of the Holocaust itself. Kevin Dunn, ITN.
There's been a new development tonight in the investigation into the murder of Stephen Lawrence. Police say they're examining a knife and a metal bar found buried in the garden of a house where 2 of the suspects used to live. Harry Smith has more.
The knife and iron bar were found buried in the back garden of a house in Eltham in South London, near to where Stephen Lawrence was murdered. The present occupants of the house have no connection with the crime, but the house was once the home of Jamie and Neely Court, who were among the 5 originally suspected in connection with the killing. 3 of them were later charged and acquitted at the Old Bailey. 18-year-old Stephen Lawrence was stabbed to death at a bus stop in Eltham 7 years ago. A judicial report into the police handling of the bungled inquiry later accused Scotland Yard of being institutionally racist. As part of a renewed inquiry, Stephen's parents made a recent televised appeal for information. That appeal coincided with the arrest of 3 people in connection with the killing. They have since been released on bail. Sources here at Scotland Yard said the knife and bar had been found more than 2 weeks ago. The discovery was being announced now as part of the inquiry team's attempts to persuade former friends and relatives of those they suspect to come forward now with vital information. Information which one senior detective said could provide the final piece in the puzzle. Harry Smith, ITN, New Scotland Yard.
A 5-month-old baby found with severe head injuries in his pram in Newcastle died in hospital today. The infant was found outside this metro station in Newcastle upon Tyne. His 24-year-old father is being questioned. 3 youths were earlier released on police bail. Police are still appealing for witnesses. One of South Africa's best-known sporting personalities, Hansie Cronje, the country's cricket captain, admitted today that he took money from a bookmaker. Cronje said he didn't actually fix matches, but he had been less than honest. The South African Cricket Board sacked him immediately. Here's Paul Davis.
For days he's been denying all allegations, but early this morning South Africa's cricket captain telephoned his chairman and admitted he'd acted less than honestly. The South African Cricket Board immediately sacked Hansie Cronje, calling a press conference to explain the decision. Chairman Ali Bakker said Cronje had admitted receiving $15,000 American from an Indian bookmaker, but still denied claims that he deliberately threw games.
He denies match fixing. Our information is that it detailed providing information and forecasting. The
Indian police say Cronje is guilty of much more than that. They claim to have recorded telephone calls that show he and other South African players agreed to deliberately lose the recent series in India. With South African cricket admitting it's in crisis, the disgraced skipper remarkably appeared with the country's sports minister at his side, continuing to deny the charges from India.
I want to quote Hansie here when he says, "I wish to emphasize that the allegations of match fixing by myself are devoid of all truth."
Bob Woolmer, who's coached in South Africa and is a personal friend of Cronje, says he is stunned.
I've supported him for the last 2 or 3 days, and I just find it, I still can't believe it. I'm hoping that, when the announcement comes, or when his explanation comes, it's not quite as bad as we all think.
Former England captain Ian Botham now wants a full investigation.
Enough sweeping it under the carpet, and let's find out who the people are and how far it goes. What scares me is just how far up the line this corruption goes.
Cronje will be missing from the South African team that starts a one-day series against Australia tomorrow. Paul Davis, ITN.
The authorities in Romania and Hungary are tonight struggling to cope following extensive floods which have claimed the lives of 9 people and left hundreds homeless. A state of emergency is in force in both countries. Here's Andrew Simmons.
The floods which are sweeping through northern Romania and large areas of Hungary are the worst in 30 years. This is a street in the Romanian region of Transylvania. The floods have been relentless for a week now. 9 people have already died, and early estimates on the costs of damage run into millions of pounds. The rush of water from the swollen rivers is indiscriminate. For the people left with homes destroyed or damaged beyond recognition, it's devastating. These are poor parts of Eastern Europe where something like buildings and contents insurance is a luxury few can afford. In Romania, the government has promised aid. Most are sceptical. Similar assurances have been made before during flooding emergencies smaller in scale. The waters are still rising, and while a major rescue operation is mounted, it will be a long time before normal life returns here. Andrew Simmons, ITN.
Here, government plans to cut the gay age of consent from 18 to 16 to bring it into line with the law for heterosexuals got an unopposed second reading in the House of Lords tonight. Pearce shied away from voting the plan down for a 3rd time in defiance of the government. The Kenneth Noy murder trial heard today from a witness who said a man looking like Stephen Cameron, who Noy stabbed to death, had been involved in a roadside confrontation just weeks earlier. The evidence came at the end of the case for Noy's defence. Shuli Ghosh reports.
Kenneth Noy was driven from court this afternoon after hearing the final evidence being given on his behalf. This man, James Hutton, said he'd been involved in a road rage incident with Stephen Cameron just before he died. Driving on a slip road, he'd been cut up by a red rascal van and had flashed his lights. He told the court the van had stopped and the driver got out. It was a young man who seemed to be in a rage, he said. Questioned by Stephen Batten QC, Mr. Hutton said the man had stood and stared at him. Then he seemed to change his mind and return to the van. 3 weeks later, Mr. Hutton had seen Stephen's photo in the paper. He believed it was the same man. Later, as Stephen's parents listened, a statement was read to the court from a wheelchair-bound man who'd been befriended by Noy. As the words describing him as kind and considerate were read out, Noy broke down and wept in the dock. This afternoon, Julian Bevan QC made his final speech for the prosecution. He said Noy had embellished and invented what happened. Tomorrow, Kenneth Noy's barrister Stephen Batten QC will make his closing speech, pulling together the evidence that Noy acted in self-defence. Then the judge will start his summing up. Shuli Ghosh, ITN, at the Old Bailey.
The supermarket giant Tesco today confirmed its position as the market leader, announcing huge profits, new jobs and plans to expand its successful online business into a separate company. Tesco's sales figures rose by a fifth to reach a record £20 billion over the past year. That gives the company £933 million in pre-tax profits. The plans for internet shopping mean 8,000 jobs will be created in Britain, most of them part-time. That's possible because the public spent £125 million last year alone at Tesco's online shopping site. Life-saving drugs may soon be widely available to women with breast or ovarian cancer, in a move aimed at ending the so-called postcode lottery of treatment. The National Institute for Clinical Excellence is expected to recommend that health authorities should not withhold the drugs on cost grounds. Lawrence McGuinty explains.
Judith Ainge has advanced breast cancer. Doctors recommend a taxane drug, but the health authority won't pay, and might not pay even after today's news.
I have a letter here from the Northamptonshire Health Authority to my MP, and it is still saying that if NICE recommend it, it doesn't mean to say we will get it because of funding.
Taxanes are derived from yew trees. Doctors say they work when other treatments fail. But just because the National Institute for Clinical Excellence now says they're effective, doesn't automatically mean health authorities will pay for them.
I'm very hopeful that the health authorities will suddenly say, hear what you're saying, Mr. Blair, here's the money for taxanes in breast and ovarian cancer. I'm a bit cynical though, and I'll just wait and bide my time.
Visiting a walk-in centre today, Mr. Blair fell short of promising government would provide the money.
For the first time, we've got a reform in the health service that allows us to assess properly what the effect of drugs like these cancer drugs really is. And based on that assessment, we can then fund the cancer treatment or drug treatment properly.
With the extra money Mr. Blair has given the NHS, health authorities today said they would be able to pay for the cancer drugs. But that isn't quite a promise that they will. Lawrence McGuinty, ITN.
The Queen flies to Northern Ireland tomorrow for a visit which could prove controversial. Nationalists are angry that during it she'll present one of Britain's highest honours, the George Cross, to the Royal Ulster Constabulary. Joe Andrews reports.
The IUC at Hillsborough this evening checking the site before the Queen comes to present the force with the George Cross. It's been awarded for the courage and dedication of the officers and their families over the past 30 years. And for those who've lost relatives, it'll be a moment of great pride.
The IUC has lost 302 officers and there are thousands injured. So at least to the memory of our husbands that are dead and for the injured officers that are carrying those injuries day in and day out, it's a very fitting tribute.
The visit comes at a time of great transition for this police force. Tonight, the Chief Constable said he expected hundreds of officers to be made redundant by the end of the year. But the award of the medal has offended members of the nationalist community, especially those like Jim McCabe, whose wife was killed by a plastic bullet.
These people should not be given awards. They should be brought before the courts to answer for their crimes against the community, including the killing of an innocent mother of 3 children.
The Queen's visit and the presentation of this medal are clearly aimed at trying to draw some sort of a line under the RUC's past. The legislation to give the force a new name and a new badge in an attempt to make it more acceptable to both communities here is due to be introduced at Westminster before Easter. Joe Andrews, ITN, Belfast.
The main news again, the historian David Irving says he's crushed but not destroyed after losing his High Court libel action over a book about his denial of the Holocaust. And police are examining a knife and a metal bar found in the garden of a house where 2 of the Stephen Lawrence murder suspects used to live. Tonight's financial figures and technology shares fell at the last minute here in London, leaving the FTSE 100 154 points down at the close. On Wall Street, the Dow Jones closed 100 points higher and the pound closed almost 1/3 cent higher against the dollar. A look now at tomorrow's papers. And the Independent reports on our top story tonight, David Irving's failed libel case. It says he faces ruin after a crushing defeat. That story is also on the Telegraph's front page. It reports that Irving faces a legal bill of more than £2 million for the 3-month trial. The Times says the case has left Mr. Irving's career in tatters and the decision sets a benchmark for historians of the Second World War. The Financial Times leads on the government's decision to order Premier Oil to withdraw from a project in Burma as part of its ethical foreign policy against human rights abuses there. The Sun carries that story about new hope of a breakthrough in the Stephen Lawrence murder case after the discovery of a knife at the former home of 2 of the original suspects. And like most of the back pages tomorrow, the Mirror has the sacking of Hansi Cronje over the scandal that's rocked South African cricket. And that's the news tonight. The ITV Evening News is at 6:30 tomorrow, and I'll be back at 11. Until then, from all of us on the ITV Nightly News team, goodbye.